The grandfather clock in Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's office chimed twice, its melodic bronze notes echoing through the marble corridors of the Capitol building like whispered secrets in an empty cathedral. The soft amber glow of her desk lamp painted intricate shadows across towers of documents that had become her nightly companions over the past week. Outside, Washington, D.C. slumbered under a blanket of January snow, but inside these hallowed halls, justice never rested. Jasmine rubbed her tired eyes and reached for another cup of coffee that had long since grown cold. The Ethics Committee's investigation into the controversial pardon of Dr. Jill Biden had consumed her thoughts and invaded her dreams. What had initially appeared to be a routine review of presidential clemency procedures had gradually transformed into something far more complex and troubling. She lifted the next manila folder with fingers that trembled slightly from exhaustion and caffeine. The label read Financial Transactions, December 2024. As she opened it, loose papers scattered across her mahogany desk like autumn leaves in a sudden wind. Bank statements, wire transfer receipts, and legal documents created a mosaic of numbers and signatures that told stories few were meant to read. Another dead end, she murmured to herself, squinting at yet another routine transaction between the Biden Foundation and various charitable organizations. The amounts were substantial but appeared legitimate on the surface. Everything seemed to follow proper protocols, each signature authenticated, each transfer properly documented. But then something caught her eye. Hidden among the standard transfers was a single-line item that made her heart skip a beat. A wire transfer for $2.5 million, dated December 15, 2024, exactly 1 week before the controversial pardon was announced. The sending account belonged to the Clinton Global Initiative Foundation. The receiving account was registered to a shell company she'd never seen mentioned in any of the official documentation. Jasmine's hands began to shake as she traced the paper trail with her finger. The shell company, Potomac Consulting LLC, had been established just 3 days before receiving the transfer. Its registered address was a small office building in downtown Washington, the same building that housed several other consulting firms with suspiciously vague business descriptions. "This can't be right," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the silent office. She reached for her computer and began cross-referencing the company's registration documents. The corporate filing revealed a single director, a name she recognized from Hillary Clinton's inner circle of advisors. Her pulse quickened as she dug deeper into the financial web. Another transfer caught her attention, $500,000 from Potomac Consulting to a legal firm that specialized in federal clemency cases. The timing was impossible to ignore. The payment was made just 2 days before Dr. Biden's legal team filed their final appeal for presidential consideration. Jasmine leaned back in her leather chair, her mind racing as the implications became clear. This wasn't just about a controversial pardon anymore. This was about influence, about the very foundations of democratic processes being quietly undermined by those who claimed to protect them. She picked up her secure phone and considered calling her chief of staff, but hesitated. The hour was late, and more importantly, she needed to be absolutely certain before making accusations that could reshape the political landscape. Instead, she returned to the documents with renewed focus, searching for additional connections. The next folder contained email correspondence between various Democratic Party officials. Most were routine communications about fundraising events and policy positions, but buried deep within the stack was a printed email that made her blood run cold. The message was from Hillary Clinton's personal account to an unnamed recipient, dated December 18, 2024. The subject line read, "Sensitivity of current situation." The content was brief but devastating. As discussed, all documentation regarding our recent consultation fees must be archived according to our standard protocols. The timing is particularly delicate given current political sensitivities. I trust you understand the importance of discretion in these matters. Jasmine read the email 3 times, each reading confirming what her instincts had already told her. The carefully chosen words were classic political speak, saying everything while appearing to say nothing at all. Consultation fees clearly referred to the suspicious transfers. Standard protocols likely meant destroying or hiding evidence. And political sensitivities could only refer to the pending pardon decision. She stood up abruptly, knocking over her coffee cup and sending a brown stain spreading across her desk blotter. The implications were staggering. If her interpretation was correct, Hillary Clinton had not only facilitated what appeared to be a financial exchange related to the pardon, but she had also orchestrated a cover-up of the evidence. The weight of her discovery settled on her shoulders like a heavy winter coat. This wasn't just about political scandal anymore, this was about the fundamental integrity of American democratic institutions. Citizens had the right to know if presidential pardons were being influenced by financial considerations, regardless of the political cost. Jasmine spent the next 2 hours meticulously copying every relevant document, ensuring she had backup copies stored in multiple secure locations. She documented the chain of evidence, timestamped each discovery, and prepared a preliminary report that outlined her findings in clinical, legal language that stripped away emotion and focused purely on facts. As dawn began to break over the nation's capital, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded her why she'd fallen in love with public service in the first place, Jasmine made her decision. The American people deserved transparency, even when that transparency threatened to shake the very foundations of her own political party. She reached for her phone and dialed the Ethics Committee chairman's emergency line. "Sir, I need to call an emergency session for this morning," she said when he answered with a groggy voice. "I've discovered evidence that requires immediate committee attention." "Jasmine, it's barely 6 in the morning. Can't this wait until our regular session next week?" "No, sir, it cannot. I have documented evidence of potential financial impropriety related to the Biden pardon case. Evidence that implicates one of the most senior figures in our party." There was a long pause before the chairman responded. "How senior are we talking about, Congresswoman?" Jasmine took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would set in motion events that could not be undone. "Hillary Clinton, sir. I have evidence suggesting she facilitated payments that may have influenced the presidential pardon decision." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Jasmine wondered if the connection had been lost. Finally, the chairman's voice returned, heavy with the weight of political implications. "Emergency session at 9 o'clock. Full committee attendance." "And Jasmine?" "Yes, sir?" "You better be absolutely certain about this. What you're suggesting could change everything." As Jasmine hung up the phone, she gazed out her window at the awakening city. Government workers were beginning their daily commute, tourists were gathering for their first glimpse of democracy in action, and somewhere in the distance, church bells were calling the faithful to morning prayer. She had 3 hours to prepare for what might be the most important presentation of her career. 3 hours to organize evidence that could either restore public faith in democratic institutions or tear apart the political party she had devoted her life to serving. The irony wasn't lost on her. In seeking to protect democracy, she might be forced to damage it. In pursuing justice, she might have to sacrifice the very unity that made justice possible. But as she gathered her documents and prepared for the confrontation ahead, Jasmine reminded herself of the oath she had taken when first elected to Congress. She had sworn to protect and defend the Constitution, not any individual or political party. If that oath required her to challenge even the most powerful figures in American politics, then so be it. The morning sun climbed higher over Washington, casting long shadows across the Capitol dome. In a few hours, those shadows would witness a confrontation that would test the very principles upon which American democracy was built. And Jasmine Crockett was ready to face whatever consequences her pursuit of truth might bring. The Ethics Committee chamber buzzed with nervous energy as members filed in through the heavy oak doors, their hushed conversations creating a symphony of whispered speculation. The morning light streaming through tall windows cast geometric patterns across the polished mahogany table, where nameplates stood like silent sentinels marking each member's territory in the coming political storm. Jasmine Crockett sat at her designated spot, a manila folder thick with evidence positioned precisely in front of her like a chess piece ready for the opening gambit. Her hands remained steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to unleash, years of courtroom experience having taught her to channel nervous energy into laser-focused determination. Chairman Morrison called the session to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel, the sound echoing off the chamber's marble walls with the finality of a judge's verdict. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered today to address urgent matters brought to our attention by Congresswoman Crockett regarding the Biden pardon investigation." Jasmine rose smoothly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years making arguments that could change lives. Mr. Chairman, honored colleagues, what I'm about to present challenges our fundamental understanding of the events surrounding the recent presidential clemency decision. She opened her folder with deliberate precision, withdrawing the first document like a prosecutor presenting Exhibit A. On December 15, 2024, exactly 1 week before the pardon announcement, a wire transfer of $2.5 million was initiated from the Clinton Global Initiative Foundation to a shell company that had been established just 3 days prior. The committee members leaned forward almost in unison, their casual morning demeanor replaced by sharp attention. Jasmine continued her methodical presentation, each piece of evidence building upon the last like stones in a carefully constructed wall. Furthermore, this shell company, Potomac Consulting LLC, made a subsequent payment of $500,000 to the legal firm representing Dr. Biden's clemency case, just 2 days before the final appeal was filed. Murmurs rippled through the chamber like stones thrown into still water. Chairman Morrison raised his hand for silence, but before he could speak, the chamber's main doors swung open with such force that the brass hinges creaked in protest. Hillary Clinton strode into the room with the commanding presence of someone who had walked these halls of power for decades. Her silver hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour, her navy blue suit pressed to perfection, and her eyes held the sharp intelligence of a master strategist who had faced down adversaries across the globe. The chamber fell silent as if someone had suddenly sucked all the air from the room. Hillary's heels clicked against the marble floor with metronomic precision as she approached the witness table, her gaze never leaving Jasmine's face. "Mr. Chairman," Hillary said, her voice carrying the measured cadence of someone accustomed to commanding attention in rooms where world-changing decisions were made. "I understand that Congresswoman Crockett has some questions about my conduct. If she wishes to make public accusations, then I believe she should have the courtesy to make them in my presence." Chairman Morrison's face had gone pale, clearly unprepared for this unexpected development. "Mrs. Clinton, this is highly irregular. The committee hasn't formally requested your testimony." Hillary smiled with the confidence of someone who had navigated political minefields for 30 years. "No request is necessary when one's integrity is being questioned in the halls of Congress. I'm here voluntarily to address whatever concerns have been raised." She took the seat directly across from Jasmine, creating an invisible line of tension that seemed to crackle with electricity. The two women studied each other like chess masters contemplating their opening moves, each recognizing in the other a formidable opponent worthy of respect. "Congresswoman Crockett," Hillary continued, her tone remaining professionally courteous despite the underlying steel, "I'm prepared to answer any questions you have about my actions. I only ask that you have the courage to ask them directly." Jasmine felt a surge of adrenaline course through her veins. This was the moment she had prepared for, the confrontation that would define not just this investigation but potentially her entire political career. She picked up the bank transfer document, holding it so that Hillary could see it clearly. "Mrs. Clinton, can you explain why your foundation transferred $2.5 million to a shell company that was created specifically to channel money to Dr. Biden's legal team?" Hillary's expression didn't change, but Jasmine noticed a slight tightening around her eyes. "I can explain many things, Congresswoman. But first, I think we should establish the proper context for this discussion. Are we conducting a formal hearing, or are we engaging in a political fishing expedition?" "We're seeking the truth," Jasmine replied firmly. "The American people deserve to know if presidential pardons are being influenced by financial considerations." "The American people," Hillary repeated slowly, "deserve many things. They deserve leaders who understand the complexity of governance. They deserve representatives who don't confuse idealism with naivety." The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down before a duel. Jasmine felt the weight of every gaze in the room, some supportive, others skeptical, all waiting to see how she would respond to this masterful deflection. "Mrs. Clinton, with respect, complexity doesn't excuse circumventing proper procedures. Can you or can you not explain these financial transfers?" Hillary leaned back in her chair, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both relaxation and readiness for combat. The Clinton Global Initiative has facilitated countless financial transactions over the years, all properly documented and legally executed. If you're suggesting that every transfer requires congressional approval, then perhaps you should reconsider the scope of legislative oversight. I'm suggesting, Jasmine said, her voice rising slightly, that transfers timing precisely with pardon proceedings deserve explanation.
And I'm suggesting, Hillary countered, that correlation is not causation. A lesson I learned in law school, which you might find useful in your current position. The condescension in Hillary's tone sparked something fierce in Jasmine's chest.
She reached for another document, this one containing the email correspondence she had discovered in the early morning hours. Then perhaps you can explain this email, dated December 18, discussing consultation fees that needed to be archived according to standard protocols due to political sensitivities. For the first time since entering the chamber, Hillary's composure showed the slightest crack. Her fingers drummed once against the table's surface before she caught herself.
Congressional oversight of private correspondence is a dangerous precedent, Congresswoman Crockett. Today it's my emails, tomorrow it might be yours. This isn't about privacy, Mrs. Clinton. This is about transparency in government processes that affect every American citizen.
Hillary's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger or might have been admiration.
You speak of transparency as if it's an absolute good. Tell me, Congresswoman, what happens when transparency conflicts with stability? What happens when your pursuit of perfect openness threatens the very institutions you've sworn to protect?
The question hung in the air like smoke from a fired cannon.
Jasmine felt the philosophical weight of it, the way it challenged not just her accusations but her fundamental beliefs about governance and responsibility.
I believe, Jasmine said carefully, that institutions strong enough to deserve protection are strong enough to withstand the truth. Hillary leaned forward, her voice dropping to just above a whisper but carrying clearly throughout the silent chamber.
Dr.
Jill Biden is a good woman who made an honest mistake.
She accepted consulting fees from an educational foundation without properly declaring them on tax documents.
A technicality that could have destroyed her husband's legacy and handed political ammunition to those who would use it to undermine everything this administration has accomplished.
The admission landed like a thunderbolt in the room.
Several committee members sat back in their chairs as if physically pushed by the implications of Hillary's words.
So you admit to facilitating the cover-up of this information? Jasmine pressed.
I admit to protecting a decent family from a political circus that would have served no constructive purpose. Hillary's voice carried a weight of experience, of battles fought and prices paid. Sometimes, Congresswoman, leadership requires making difficult choices that history may judge harshly but that serve the greater good.
Jasmine felt something shift in the room's atmosphere.
Hillary's words, spoken with such conviction and obvious pain, had transformed the dynamic from accusation and denial to something more complex, a philosophical debate about the nature of power and responsibility.
Mrs. Clinton, Jasmine said more gently, I understand the impulse to protect people you care about. But who protects the system when those in power decide which truths the public deserves to know?
Hillary was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving from Jasmine to the windows where morning light continued to stream into the chamber. When she spoke again, her voice carried a vulnerability that few had ever heard from the former Secretary of State.
You're young, Congresswoman Crockett. You still believe that right and wrong are clearly defined territories on some cosmic map. But governance isn't conducted in classrooms or courtrooms. It's practiced in the gray spaces between ideals and reality, where every choice carries consequences you couldn't have anticipated. The emotion in Hillary's voice was unmistakable now, years of compromise and difficult decisions weighing heavy in her words. Do you think it was easy for me to make those calls? Do you think I enjoyed becoming complicit in something that violates every principle I've spent my career advocating? Then why did you do it? Jasmine asked, her prosecutor's instincts sensing that Hillary was on the verge of a complete revelation.
Hillary's answer came so quietly that the court reporter had to lean forward to catch the words, because sometimes protecting democracy requires protecting it from itself. The silence that followed Hillary's confession stretched through the Ethics Committee chamber like a taut wire ready to snap. Jasmine stared across the mahogany table at the woman who had just admitted to orchestrating one of the most significant political cover-ups in recent memory, yet had done so with such profound conviction that the moral landscape of the entire situation had shifted beneath everyone's feet. Chairman Morrison cleared his throat nervously, his gavel resting forgotten in his trembling hand. The weight of Hillary's words, "Protecting democracy requires protecting it from itself," hung in the air like incense in a cathedral, sacred and suffocating simultaneously. "Mrs. Clinton," Jasmine said finally, her voice carrying a new note of respect that surprised even herself. "I appreciate your honesty. But surely you understand that your admission creates an impossible precedent. If senior political figures can decide unilaterally which truths serve the greater good, then we've essentially abandoned the principles of democratic transparency." Hillary nodded slowly, her earlier defiance replaced by something that looked remarkably like relief. "You're absolutely right, Congresswoman. And that recognition is precisely what has been tearing at my conscience for weeks." She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a small digital recorder, placing it on the table with the reverence of someone handling a sacred relic. "There's something else you need to hear. A conversation I had with Dr. Biden 3 days before the pardon was announced." The committee members leaned forward as Hillary pressed play. The device crackled to life, filling the chamber with voices that seemed to echo from another world. "Jill, you need to understand the position this puts everyone in." Hillary's recorded voice was weary, laden with exhaustion. "I never asked you to protect me, Hillary." Dr. Biden's response was firm but tinged with regret. "If my mistakes damage the administration, then that's a consequence I have to face. It's not just about you anymore. If this information becomes public now, it provides ammunition that could destabilize everything we've worked to build. The opposition will use it to question every decision, every appointment, every policy initiative. So what are you suggesting? That we handle this quietly. Make the financial adjustments necessary to satisfy any legal requirements, but keep the details away from public scrutiny until after the immediate political crisis passes." "You mean cover it up?" There was a long pause in the recording before Hillary's voice returned, heavy with moral weight. "I mean protect the institutions that are bigger than any of us individually." Jasmine felt her world tilt slightly on its axis as she listened to the exchange. This wasn't the voice of a corrupt politician seeking personal gain. This was someone genuinely struggling with an impossible choice between competing values, transparency and stability, individual accountability, and collective welfare. The recording continued with Dr. Biden's final response: "Hillary, I can't allow you to sacrifice your integrity for my mistakes. If this comes out, I want people to know you acted out of loyalty, not corruption." Hillary clicked off the recorder and looked directly at Jasmine. Dr. Biden insisted on making that statement. She knew that if our actions ever came to light, people needed to understand the context. Jasmine sat back in her chair, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. The evidence was clear, the admission complete, but the moral framework she had brought to this investigation had been thoroughly complicated by what she had learned. "Mrs. Clinton," she said carefully, "I need to ask you directly, do you believe your actions were legally justifiable?" "No," Hillary replied without hesitation. "They were not legally justifiable. They violated federal transparency requirements and circumvented proper oversight procedures." "And do you believe they were morally justifiable?" Hillary was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving to the American flag standing in the corner of the chamber. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 3 decades in public service. "I believe they were necessary. Whether that makes them morally justifiable is a question that keeps me awake at night and will likely continue to do so for the rest of my life." Chairman Morrison finally found his voice. "Mrs. Clinton, given your admissions today, this committee will need to make recommendations regarding potential charges and sanctions." "I understand," Hillary said. "And am prepared to accept whatever consequences you deem appropriate." Jasmine felt a strange sensation building in her chest, part admiration, part frustration, part something she couldn't quite identify. She had come into this investigation seeking justice, but the neat categories of right and wrong that had guided her legal career seemed inadequate for the complexity of what she had uncovered. "Mr. Chairman," she said, standing slowly, "I'd like to request a brief recess to consider the full implications of what we've learned today." "Granted. Well, reconvene in 30 minutes. As the committee members filed out of the chamber, Jasmine remained seated, staring at the documents spread before her like pieces of a puzzle that kept rearranging themselves every time she thought she had found the complete picture. Hillary also remained, gathering her papers with the methodical precision of someone who had spent a lifetime organizing complex information into manageable compartments.
"Congresswoman," Hillary said softly, "may I ask what you intend to recommend?" Jasmine looked up, meeting Hillary's gaze directly. "I honestly don't know.
A week ago, I thought justice was straightforward: you identify wrongdoing, you pursue accountability, you protect the system.
But you forced me to confront questions I never considered."
Such as whether perfect transparency is always compatible with effective governance. Whether individual accountability sometimes conflicts with collective welfare.
Whether the pursuit of ideal justice might sometimes undermine practical stability.
Hillary smiled, and for the first time since entering the chamber, it seemed genuine rather than strategic.
"Those are the questions that separate true leaders from mere politicians, Congresswoman.
The fact that you're wrestling with them gives me hope for the future of this institution." When the committee reconvened, Jasmine stood to deliver her recommendations with a speech she had crafted during the recess, drawing on principles she had never before had to articulate. "Mr. Chairman, colleagues, what we have learned today challenges our understanding of accountability, transparency, and leadership in a complex democracy.
Mrs.
Clinton has admitted to actions that violated proper procedures, but she has also revealed motivations that, while not legally defensible, were rooted in genuine concern for institutional stability." She paused, feeling the weight of every word she was about to speak. "Therefore, I recommend that this committee pursue a course of action that serves both justice and wisdom. I propose that Mrs. Clinton accept responsibility for her procedural violations through public acknowledgement and community service focused on strengthening governmental transparency initiatives." A murmur of surprise rippled through the chamber.
Chairman Morrison raised an eyebrow. "Congresswoman, are you suggesting we forego criminal referral?"
"I'm suggesting that punishment without purpose serves no one. Mrs. Clinton's experience and expertise could be channeled toward creating better systems for handling situations like this in the future. Rather than simply condemning past actions, we could use this opportunity to strengthen democratic institutions going forward." Hillary looked genuinely surprised, her composed facade cracking slightly to reveal something that might have been gratitude mixed with respect. Furthermore, Jasmine continued, "I propose that this committee work with Mrs. Clinton to develop new protocols for handling sensitive political information that balance transparency requirements with legitimate institutional concerns. Let her help build the system she wishes had existed when she faced these impossible choices." Chairman Morrison looked around the table at his colleagues, reading their expressions before responding.
"Mrs. Clinton, would you be willing to accept such an arrangement?"
Hillary stood slowly, her voice carrying a note of humility that few had ever heard from the former Secretary of State.
"Mr.
Chairman, Congresswoman Crockett has offered me something I never expected: redemption through service rather than punishment through condemnation.
I would be honored to accept such an opportunity."
3 months later, Jasmine sat in her office reading news reports about the Clinton Institute for Government Transparency, a new organization dedicated to developing protocols for balancing public accountability with institutional stability. The controversy had certainly damaged Hillary's political capital, but it had also created something constructive from what could have been purely destructive. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Thank you for teaching an old politician that justice and wisdom aren't always the same thing, but they don't have to be enemies either. H.C." Jasmine smiled and looked out her window at the Capitol dome, where afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across the building that housed both America's highest ideals and its most human compromises. She had learned something fundamental about leadership during those intense days of investigation and confrontation: that sometimes the greatest courage wasn't found in pursuing perfect justice, but in finding imperfect solutions that served the deeper purposes justice was meant to achieve. The pursuit of truth, she realized, sometimes required accepting that truth itself was more complex than any single perspective could contain. And perhaps that acceptance, rather than any specific outcome, was the real victory for democratic institutions that depended on the wisdom of imperfect people making difficult choices in impossible circumstances.